What's going on, guys? Alex here with TFL, and that right there behind me is the all-new 2020 Polaris Slingshot R. Now, you might remember last year I actually reviewed the 2019 model. That was an SLR, a little bit of a different trim, but there's actually a ton of changes for 2020. It looks similar, but it's not. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through all the differences between this 2020 Slingshot and the 2019 I reviewed last year. So whether you're a current Slingshot owner, trying to decide whether you should upgrade, or you're just super interested in these crazy three-wheeled vehicles, this is the video for you. I'm gonna run you through all the differences, and don't worry, Polaris sent this to us for a few weeks, so this is a differences video. I will have the full in-depth review coming soon with driving impressions and the whole deal, so stay tuned for that. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. The biggest change for 2020 is the powertrain, so I need to pop the hood first, and then we can get into those details. Okay, so here we are under the hood. No longer do you have GM's 2.3 liter Ecotec engine. You now have a 2 liter 4-cylinder ProStar engine directly from Polaris. This one makes 203 horsepower and 144 pound-feet of torque. Now in the lower trims, the SL, you're gonna get the same motor, but it's gonna be slightly detuned, 178 horsepower and 120 foot-pounds of torque. Now, how does that compare to last year's GM motor? Well, the GM made 173 horsepower and 166 pound-feet of torque. So you are getting more horsepower out of this new engine, but less torque. This new engine also does rev out much higher. So this revs to about 8,500 RPM. That GM engine only went to 7,200. And this also makes its peak power higher up in the RPM range. So you're getting that peak power in this engine at about 8,500 RPM right at the top versus 6,200 RPM in the older GM engine. Now Paul, our race car driver, actually took the older Slingshot with that GM Ecotec engine out on our local track. He did some 0 to 60 testing, and he was able to get a 0 to 60 time of 6.97 seconds. Now Polaris says that this new engine is capable of getting the Slingshot 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds. That shaves off a good 2 seconds. You'll have to stay tuned for my full review where I'll test that out and see if that's actually true. And there's one more major change with the 2020 Slingshot, but you have to get inside to see it, and that's right here. Yes, we have a push-button transmission, so reverse, neutral, and drive, and that must mean we have an automatic, right? So prior to 2020, the only option for a Slingshot was a 5-speed manual, and that's the one we've always tested. But now you have an option for what Polaris is calling an AutoDrive transmission, which is basically an automated manual. Now the 5-speed manual is still available if you want to get it, but this AutoDrive transmission is standard on the lower SL trim. It's a $1,700 option on this R trim. It turns the Slingshot from an enthusiast vehicle. You know, you had to know how to drive stick to drive this thing before, and it turned it into something that everybody can drive. Now you just need to have a driver's license and know how to drive an automatic car, and you can have plenty of fun in the Slingshot, which I think is really cool. I'll give you my full thoughts on this AutoDrive in the full review because I definitely have a lot to say about it, but that's for another time. So yeah, new engine and new trans. I think that's enough for this to be considered a major refresh. Again, stay tuned for my full review to know how it drives. But now we start getting into some of the fun stuff, which is some of the new styling details, some of the new features. So let's jump in. There's a ton to go through. All right, let's start out and talk about exterior styling, and I first want to talk about the paint job. It's got this really cool red and black paint scheme. The one we had last year looked very similar, but this is a little bit different. They're actually using this really cool matte black paint on here this year, and I really like it. You've got some of it up front, also kind of in this tail section back here, and I think the matte black paint really adds a lot. To me and you, to all you guys watching this, to a lot of automotive enthusiasts, this is a Slingshot. But to a lot of people who don't know what this is, This is a Batmobile. That's just what they call it. And the Batmobile just looks right in matte black. The front end is also pretty heavily redesigned, so this whole area is new right here. It used to kind of pass through and you'd see a lot of suspension components back there. I didn't really love the look of it. I think this looks a lot cleaner. Some people might complain that you can't see the engineering behind it. Personally, I don't think any of the suspension components are too interesting to look at on this vehicle, so I'd rather have it covered up. It definitely looks way more aerodynamic, makes it look a little meaner, and I just think it completes the look. I like that little plastic piece they added down in the front area. There's also a new lighting package all the way around on the exterior, so your outboard lights on the front have this new design to them, whereas they used to look more like your classic circle projector lens. You also have a new daytime running lamp in that new plastic portion down below, and an all-new headlight up front in the center of the vehicle as well. The third brake light pretty much has an identical design to last year's model, but the taillights are new as well. There's a little bit of color added into them when they're off. And Polaris will tell you that there are some new wheel options for 2020. These are the same wheels that were on the 2019 we tested, but on the Top Dog Grand Touring LE, you get some really cool gold wheels this year. And now let's hop back in and talk about the rest of the interior changes, because now that we've got the transmission out of the way, there's a ton of stuff to go through in here. So the first thing you'll notice when you get in is there's no keyhole anymore. Instead, you actually get keyless start. So it does come with 2 keys, and that's because there are still some lockable storage containers behind the seats and your glove box up there. But you do get this key fob now, and if you just get in the vehicle, put your foot on the brake, it will recognize that the key fob's in here, it'll start beeping and priming the fuel pump. And then once it stops beeping, you can just keep the key in your pocket or throw it here, foot on the brake, push the starter button, and you're good to go. Now I'm gonna shut that off so that you can hear me, and I'll start it up when needed to talk about some of these changes. Another thing you'll notice is that the interior is much more driver-centric. So it looks very similar to last year's, but they kind of re-sculpted this center area here. The screen's now angled a little bit further down. It's kind of facing the driver instead of up at the sky, which I really like. And you also get a new cluster. So in last year's, you just had a tach and a speedometer. You now have this LCD screen in the center. So that'll, give you information like whether the fuel pump is still priming and whether you're ready to start. It'll show you your tach, what gear you're in, your miles per hour, fuel gauge, all kinds of stuff. And it's really nice to have a little information screen like that, especially since at least I'm very used to having that in pretty much every car I drive nowadays. It just feels kind of at home and in its place here, right in front of the driver. The steering wheel is all new for 2020 as well. It's now a flat bottom leather wrap steering wheel, and this is one of my favorite changes for 2020. It just feels extremely sporty. I love how it kind of gets thicker right here. The stitching's pretty nice, and we had the nicer Sparco steering wheel on the one we tested last year. That was kind of an upgraded option. This is way better than that, and way better than obviously the base one that came on last year's Slingshot as well. You now have integrated media controls. You also have integrated cruise control, whereas it was on a stock in last year's model. And you now get this red button right here to switch drive modes. So yes, you now have 2 different drive modes, comfort and Slingshot mode. More on that in the full review. The steering's also all new, which is much appreciated. It's a little bit heavier, feels a little bit sporty, but also it's now 2.5 turns lock to lock, whereas last year's was 3.5 turns lock to lock. So it just feels much more sporty now and just a little more aggressive. I know I talked about the difference in the angle of the screen a little bit, but it's also powered by a new processor, so it's a little snappier, a little more responsive, a little easier to use. I really like that. I'm a big tech fan, so that always makes me happy. Also, Polaris says that it's got some new screen technology in it, so I don't know if that's a different panel or a different coating on the screen, but they say it's easier to see in direct sunlight. I have the brightness cranked all the way up right now. It's a super sunny day outside, and even with sunglasses and through a tinted visor on my helmet at the same time, I had no problem seeing this screen, and those were polarized sunglasses, so I'm pretty impressed by the screen technology. Some of the data screens are a little bit different as well, so it gives you some more information on things like your elevation change and battery voltage. Something it definitely didn't have last year was a estimated fuel remaining. There you can see 177 miles remaining. So I really like this new information screen. It makes it just easier to stay on top of what your vehicle's doing and when you need to stop and when you need to take it in for service. They also updated some of the amenities around the driver. So these cup holders are just a little bit bigger than last year's, so you can fit, you know, a giant drive-through soda in there if you so desire. You also get a nice padded armrest right here, which in theory is nice, but just like the seats, this gets extremely hot. So, you know, if it's 90 degrees outside, this is gonna burn your elbow more than it's gonna be padding it. But inside of there, you do have just a little bit more storage there. This doesn't lock. So you can't keep anything too valuable in there, but it's a good place to throw your wallet. Just make sure nothing's gonna fall out of the side of the vehicle. And then you get this new storage cubby up here, which again doesn't lock or anything, but it is really nice to be able to throw your phone there, since this does have a really sweet Bluetooth system. I really like the sound system in this, but it gives you a good place to just put your phone, and then you can easily, at a red light, switch songs on Spotify or do whatever you need to do. Also new is a passenger air vent. No, this doesn't have AC, but if you look under the passenger footwell, you can see this new air vent right here. And there's kind of a lever over here on the right-hand side of it, and you can just slide it open and closed to give your passenger just a little bit more airflow down by their legs. There's also a little bit of new interior lighting. It's really hard to see during the day, but there's a blue LED under the center console and also in the footwells, which makes for some cool effect at night. Also, one thing I wanted to mention that's different for 2020, they dropped one of the trim levels. So last year for 2019, there were 4 different trims. One of them was the S model, which was the lowest cost one. That one went for $20,999. That's off the table now. The cheapest Slingshot you can get for 2020 is the SL, which goes up to $26,499. So no more budget Slingshot option. You now have to be well into the $20,000 range to get into one of these. I don't know, maybe they weren't selling as many of the base ones as the fully loaded ones. I could definitely see that. Let me know what your thoughts are on that down in the comments below. Are you sad to see the base model Slingshot go away? And also for 2020, there are 23 new accessories you can get for the Slingshot from Polaris. Now, maybe you have, maybe you haven't heard of this, but the Slingshot is one of those vehicles that is pretty much infinitely customizable, just like the Jeep Wrangler. There are just so many parts you can put on it to make it your own, and there's a ton of new ones for 2020, including 3 new packages where you can get a bunch of parts bundled together. So the first package is called the Weekender package, and that gives you heated and cooled seats, as well as a tune for this new engine, which gives you a 25 horsepower bump. You also get a different wind deflector, the higher end navigation system, as well as 2 overnight bags, one for the passenger side and one for the driver's side. There's also the design package, which comes with a few higher end painted parts, including a front grille, a belt guard cover, a lower hoop accent kit, and an exterior accent kit. Or you can get the Premier package with a 265mm Premier wheel set, interior LED lighting kit, 265mm rear fender, and a 265mm rear fender decal. So there you have it, guys. There are all the changes for the new 2020 Polaris Slingshot. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Did they do enough? Should they have done more? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And also, let me know if you have any questions about this, and I'll be sure to answer them in my full review. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to go back over to TFL Car, TFL Truck, and TFLOffroad.com for the latest and greatest in Polaris 3-wheeled reviews.